Welcome to another edition of UNC Scouting Overview. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's Jason Staples, and we are sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt.
Johnny T-Shirt.
And
JohnnyT-shirt.com.
JohnnyT-shirt.com. And congruity for all your small business needs. Jason, we did one of these last week, I guess it was. We talked about the defensive backs, safeties, and corners. This week we're going to talk about linebackers and edges. And I'm going to get my comment that I've been thinking about before I forget it out. I think this is the year we either find out they've done a better job developing depth at the linebacker position than we know, or the chickens come home to roost a little bit. We'll start with Power Echols. Power Echols, of course, has played roughly 1 million snaps at North Carolina. He'll have the opportunity to do that again as he gets in the mix with Cedric Gray gone. Jason, what did you think of Power when you had a chance to sort of go through his film? You've done it a couple times, but last year's compared to the previous years.
You know, I thought he grew a good bit between 22 and 23. He's one of those guys. You mentioned he'd already played a lot of snaps. I mean, going into last year, he played 871 snaps in 22, which just being able to survive 871 snaps at the, power conference level at the linebacker position and, make it through a season and do that well, that already said a lot. But he had some significant weaknesses that emerged during the course of that 22 season. He missed his gaps too often in run support, missed a few too many tackles here and there, and he was victimized in coverage quite a bit in 2022. And then 2023 came, and he played, I think, significantly better in some of those areas that he had not been as strong in 23. I mean, Cedric Gray was the bell cow on defense last year for North Carolina, but Power Echols was not a whole lot behind where Cedric Gray's level of play was on the year. And one of the things that, I think emerged as I was taking a look at what he did last year a little more closely, the Pro Football Focus coverage grade for him was surprising to me when I looked at it, for the season. Prior years, 21, it was 59.3. Accurate, I thought, at that time. And then last year was 64.4, which is okay, but not great. And then in 23, it was a robust 75.8. I was looking at that like, really? Really? Like, he's been victimized a lot. And then you start going through and you realize he actually started to do things as a pass coverage backer, particularly in match zone type concepts, where essentially the idea is that he's got to find the person who is closest to where his responsibility is and match up closely to that player so that it turns into something like man-to-man against that player. And then if he's passing through your zone, you pass him off and find the next. So it's a matchup zone type concept if you compare that to basketball. And he really grew a lot between 2022 and 2023 in that area. One of the highlights that I used for this year, I think it was the highlight that I used for this year, the GIF that went with the story, went with the scouting report, was an example of that, where you can see him immediately on the snap, find his coverage responsibility, close on it, get a hand on the football, deflect the ball up in the air, and create an interception. And that's a play I don't think he makes prior to the Oregon game in 2022. I think the Oregon game in 2022 was a real turning point for him. That was the best he'd ever played in a North Carolina uniform. And I think he, for the most part, held that level of play over the course of 2023 with a few ups and downs here and there. But he was more reliable in hitting his run fits where he made sure that he was in the proper gap more frequently. And he did a much better job of matching and finding the right player in coverage and essentially getting hands on the ball, just making it so that there were smaller windows, being there to tackle right away, that sort of thing in coverage, to where he was not just a constant victim in coverage. Now, he did give up a higher overall NFL passer rating than when targeted than what Michael Penix had on the season. So there's still room for improvement there, right? I mean, that's, as a rule, you don't want any player on your defense giving up that high of an overall passer rating when targeted, but he still was there. He made some guys have some tough catches. He had some passes broken up. He had one pass broken up that led to an interception. He had an interception. So he's never going to be an elite coverage linebacker. That's just not his skill set. But he did become a guy that you can't just go after all the time. And the other thing is, again, when it came to his run fits, he was much more consistently in the right spots and was not essentially a problem for the defense in those areas last year, the way that at times he was in 2022. He was one of the real strengths of the defense in stopping the run last year. And if he can continue that this year, he should be one of the better run defenders at the linebacker position in the ACC.
And there's little question about his durability. You mentioned the snap counts. 155 in 21, 871 last year, 899. 871 in 22, 899 in 23. He has played nearly 2,000 snaps, or 1,500
1,925 snaps.
It's unbelievable.
That's a lot of snaps. And he's going to need to play less than that this year. I mean, that will help him, especially going into later parts of the year. It will help him be more efficient and more effective if he's not on the field every play. Now, granted, when you've got a leader on your defense and when you've got that guy who you can rely on, it's hard to take him out. The quarterback plays every play on the offense too. Yep. So normally, at least one of your backers plays almost every play, and he's probably going to be that guy this year. So he's still probably going to be 750, 800 plus snaps. But you do hope he's able to get a little bit less wear and tear on those tires this year. But there's no questioning his toughness. There's no questioning the intelligence and the competitiveness, the work ethic and all of that he's shown. There's still some things you'd like to see him improve on. He still misses too many tackles overall. There are times where you'd like to see him bring his arms to the party just a little bit more as a tackler. He's not the biggest guy in the world. He plays like he's big, but he's 220 pounds. And there are times where sometimes if a guy can square him up, if it's a big back, it's a harder thing for him. So there are places where, he's going to have some challenges, but I think he can be one of the better linebackers in the ACC on the whole, and certainly in the running as a linebacker against the run.
Yeah, and one thing that'll be interesting to see is that they can use the headsets this year. And talking to the guys during spring ball, I asked Power Echols myself, what was it like to be able to use the headsets? And he sort of talked about how they got to do it in that Oregon game you referenced, and then they did it in the spring. There'll be two of those helmets on the defensive side, and the other one will be fitted for the next guy we're going to talk about, Amare Campbell. Campbell flashed at times last year, did not get a ton of work. We've talked about the rotation at linebacker. 128 snaps. Jason, you had a chance to review his grades or to review his film. This is a guy that's going to probably play a lot this year, and he's going to step in there alongside Power for most of it.
Yeah, it's kind of unfair to ask a guy to step in and replace Cedric Gray after all he did the last couple of years. And in some sense, there's no realistic expectation that Campbell can come in and match what Cedric Gray was for this defense. But at the same point, he kind of brings his own strength there. He's 230 pounds, and I think looking at him, that's probably right. I think he's actually probably a full 230 pounds. He's not a 4.5, 8, type guy, not a low 4.6 guy, I don't think, but he's a guy that runs well enough and accelerates downhill really quickly. One of the things that does stand out about him is he triggers against the run and accelerates into his gap quickly. And that can really help. I mean, in a lot of ways, I know some evaluators for the linebacker position at the college and NFL level, that for them the most important thing for a linebacker is short area quickness, along with the requisite size, rather than a guy who's a really fast in the 40. So they would rather have a guy that's a high 4.6 that's got a really good inside the phone booth quickness and acceleration, and how quickly does he react mentally to what he sees? How quickly does he get downhill and trigger, and the first 5 yards of his acceleration into that context? That matters more to them than a guy that runs 4.48 as a linebacker. And in fact, in many cases, the guy that runs 4.48 can be a liability at backer, whereas some of these guys that are a little bit more mid to high 4.6 or even 4.7 guys, if they accelerate well, if they get downhill well, those guys actually sometimes are better players. And I think that's what you get with Amare Campbell, is he's a football player. He's a guy who, I think can be a plus level tackler. He hasn't been that yet. He missed some tackles in that 128 snaps that were kind of frustrating. There were times where he was not in the right gap. He still has a long way to go in terms of shedding blocks. But when you start seeing him in terms of playing with good pad level, the willingness to take on a lead blocker, on say power or counter or something like that, where he's meeting a guy in a hole, he's going to come downhill and he's going to hit it hard. Different things like that are really good signs for him. And I thought also, his feet looked pretty good for a guy that's 230 pounds for his ability to be able to move and match in coverage. So a lot to look forward to here. I think a guy that can be, I don't think he's going to be a liability for you on your defense. If you're Jeff Collins, you feel like you can call your defense, and he's going to be able to be a quality player at that linebacker position, which I think in replacing a guy like Cedric Gray is really all you can ask for from a first-year starter.
Yeah, and a couple things there. I mentioned the headsets, one on the field at a time, but both guys will have to be fitted for them. They'll have alternate helmets. So if Power's got the headset, Amare's wearing a regular helmet and vice versa, one per side of the field. Also, Amare Campbell, very excitable guy, very energetic, very loud. He can certainly assume the loud Cedric Gray role. The practices we were around and the opportunities we got to see him, he's there. He's there by his play and also by his voice, and that'll be interesting. Power's a more lead by example guy and a little bit quieter. Amare will be that loud guy. Jason, if they play depth like they've talked about, they're going to have to develop some other guys who were a couple, maybe 2 or 3 others that we saw during practice that you think may be contributors this fall.
Well, I mean, you saw the same guys I did, but I think the guys that sort of stood out, Michael Short was one, just because I think the physical traits are pretty obvious there. He's a guy that he's going to push to play, and they've talked the talk about wanting to play more guys. But I'm very much in a show me state kind of mood when it comes to to that sort of thing on defense. We've heard that. Here's an interesting question for you, Tommy. When was the last UNC football offseason where we did not hear the head coach talking about wanting to play more guys on defense the next year?
Never.
Yeah, I can't remember one.
I can't remember it ever being a non-talking point. Ever.
Maybe Mac's first year. Maybe the offseason there, but I think we've heard about it every season since, and it doesn't often happen. So,
Mac's first year, he had the 2 defensive linemen, Strobridge and Crawford, that played almost 1,000 snaps apiece, seemed like.
Yeah,
but it's always an issue.
Yeah.
Show me.
So show me on this. But, I thought Michael Short was a guy that stood out in that respect. Cade Law, the kid, actually, he went to my niece's high school. But Cade Law is another one that I think has a chance to play. Some positive word about him in the program as well. And then Caleb LaVallee, I think those are guys, if nothing else, you're going to see a lot of those guys on special teams, but I think they need to find roles for these guys and ways to get them on the field a little bit during games, not just to build depth, but also this is a North Carolina team that is worn down in November each of the last 3 or 4 years. They've got to find ways to load manage. If you look at the best teams in the country right now, the best teams in the country are teams that are doing a better job of load. Now, it's easier when you got more talent, but they're doing a better job of load management through the course of the year so that when they get to championship season, some of those guys are they've got a little bit more in the tank. So, I think they need to have at least 2 backers that are playing, another 15 snaps per game in place of Campbell and Echols. I would love to see them be able to get, and the way that, interesting thing, this is one of the things that Jeff Collins talked about in the coaching clinic, is he talked about how he wants to rotate guys in specific down and distance and field position situations. So the way he thinks about his defense is not about starters per se, and it's not about who starts each drive. It's that when a team starts to get down into your territory and they get inside your 30 or so, then you're going to have a certain 11, 12, 13 guys that you're pulling from. But when you're on the other side of the 50, you're on the 35, start on the 25-yard line for first play of a new drive or whatever, that's when you get your young guys on the field. You get them some extra play there, and you let your vets sit out a couple plays. And if they then get a first down and they get to the 50-yard line, maybe you put your vets on at that position then. So I do think that's something we're going to see. This is something that Jeff Collins talked specifically about having a philosophy about and specific game plans for in terms of how that works. And so I wouldn't be surprised if, after a punt, playing against Georgia Tech in whatever game of the season that is, you see, say Amare Campbell and, Michael Short or Caleb LaVallee out there at linebacker for 2 or 3 plays to begin a drive that begins at the, minus 35. And then if that drive crosses the 45 on, the plus 45, all of a sudden you're going to see Power Echols trot out there. I think you're going to see more of that this year. I think that's very smart. I think they need to do that, but I think you need to see, another 2-3 linebackers getting time.
Yeah, I think Ashton Wood's a true freshman, early enrollee, might get some time out there. Those guys, they show some in practice. We'll see if they actually play. We're going to talk about now, move over to another position. This is Jason's favorite player on the team plays this position. We're going to leave him for last. We're going to start with Jacolbe Cowan, one of Jason's, one of those type guys that has more in there, but it needs to come out. I think he's shown some flashes. Jacolbe Cowan.
Yeah, I think he's a guy that's shown some real promise, and there's talent there, like you said. The question is he going to be? Is he ever going to actually hit the potential that has flashed at times? Number one, he's got to stay healthy, and he was not healthy through most of last year. So he wound up getting that upper body injury after 6 games. Even then, though, he was playing less than 10 snaps per game. So was still not really at a point of being a major contributor, even at that. But we saw him in spring. He missed spring, most of spring, not all of it, but he missed most of spring. We saw him, dragging the sled around, doing, the various rehab things that they had him doing. And the body type sticks out. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, he's 6'4" and change, 270 pounds, long arms. He looks like you 3D printed, pretty good strong end. But there's just, the production has not yet matched the packaging. And he's a guy that, the clock's ticking. He's still got 2 seasons of eligibility left. So, there's still some time for him to develop. But the clock's starting to tick a little bit. And, the question is, how quickly can he finally get there? He's a little bit of a linear player to me. And to some degree, I think he's a little bit of a tweener. When I watch him, I always find myself asking, man, wouldn't he be better off if you added another 15 pounds to him, 20 pounds to him, and stuck him at the 3 technique and just turned him loose? I mean, that's kind of been my impression of him since he got on campus. Is like he's got a lot of traits for a big end, but he moves forward so well, and he's not really a lateral player, that I just wonder whether or not if you could find a way to slide him inside more, if he could be a pretty disruptive player with some of the quick burst and all of that he would have for that size inside. And he's a guy that, in Jeff Collins' system, I'd love to see slide inside as a situational rusher at the 3 technique, because I think, again, there's some potential there. But he's got pretty good power overall. He's got long arms. He's flashed the potential to anchor against double teams and set the edge. Carries, he's got a lot of good weight. But it's a matter for him as a edge player. He's not the strongest change of direction. Pad level could be a little better. He's not a guy that you really feel good about dropping in coverage. I'd like to see him be able to bend more in terms of being able to bend the edge and get under the pads of an offensive tackle as a pass rusher. He's just really not a guy that to date has shown a lot of pass rush capacity. I mean, you look at his pressure numbers. His pressure rate last year, not bad in the 47 snaps that he had. 7.7% pressure rate is okay, but it's not great. And then in the 200 snaps the prior year, 4.6% is pretty low. So, he's not a guy that has shown really a lot in terms of the ability to get off of pass rush block or off of pass blocks and become a dynamite rusher. So still a lot to see with him, a lot of development potential. But he's a guy that if he did take a nice step forward would really help make this defense better. But I just can't help. It just keeps nagging at me every time I watch him. Like, man, just put another 15 pounds on and move inside and become that disruptive 3 technique. And, I have to think it might have crossed the minds of the coaching staff as well. I mean, I haven't talked to them specifically about that one, but it just does stick out because the body type is so good.
Yeah, slide the slider. Move that slider to the right and add the extra weight. Slide him down the line. I agree with you there. We'll see how it shakes out. Who we got next? Well, you mentioned the 3D printing of an edge. This is the one you've always talked about that was built in the lab, Mr. Des Evans. Physical specimen, another guy that has the potential to put it all together but has not quite gotten there. Jason, what did you see on film from him? And how's he sort of progressed as he's been at Carolina?
I thought he had a pretty decent year last year, sort of quietly. Interesting thing is that in 22, he became a really good, I think, a plus level edge setter in run defense. And I thought he took a little bit of a step back on that last year. There are teams that were able to run on his side of the ball a little bit where, you'd like to have seen him dominate a little bit more at the point of attack. But I thought he also took a step forward as a pass rusher last year. And the numbers actually bore that out. I mean, he had a pressure rate of 6.6% in 2022, which is really subpar for an edge. And then that was a healthy 10.2. I mean, he produced pressure on 1 out of 10 snaps as a rusher in 2023, and that was solid. And was credited with 3 sacks. I really thought maybe one of those should have been his, but in terms of the official numbers that Carolina's using, they gave him 3. But he became, I thought, a player that at times there were moments where you could see the flashes probably more than you ever could. Both as a pass rusher. I mean, he had the one spin move for a sack against South Carolina in the opener where you're like, oh, wow. If he could do that more often, now all of a sudden you're talking about an NFL player. And then we didn't really see much of that the rest of the year. but he showed that it's there, right? And similarly, there are times where he just compressed the line of scrimmage as a run defender on the edge, and you went, oh, wow, okay, that's a plus level player. So, a lot of things to like there. Nevertheless, he's still a guy that he's one of the guys where when you watch the line of scrimmage, his hat is rarely one of the first to come off the ball. He's just not one of those guys that bursts off the line of scrimmage and threatens anybody with that initial off the ball quickness. Still tends to stand up a little bit out of his stance. And look, he's almost 6'7". So that's that's something that's always going to be something that he has to work on and focus on is keeping that pad level up. And he still has to improve there. The other thing too is, and this is to me, the mantra for me, if I'm coaching Des Evans this offseason, I've got two things I'm emphasizing with him. One is burst, get off the ball, burst. And the other is finish. Because there were a lot of plays last year, and this is a trend going all the way through his first showing up in Chapel Hill in 2020. He had probably 10 quality sack opportunities last year and just didn't convert on almost any of them, right? I mean, again, credited with being in on 3 sacks, had one solo that I remember that I saw when I went back through. So, I would like to see him figure out how to arrive where he's going a little bit angrier with a little bit better angles and finish. He's just got to finish a little bit better. And if he can do that, that would be the step forward that the defense needs to, again, convert from being almost where they want to be to being much closer to where they want to be.
He's definitely a guy that's got all the physical tools. He's got
the one physical tool. I would not say he has all of them, because the one physical tool he doesn't really have that you'd love to see is that elite level burst at his size.
That's what I was going to say. He's just not. Is it? He doesn't have that skill, or it's not urgent enough. You know what I'm saying? Is it in there?
So,
have we seen it at all?
I don't think that physically he's as bursty or explosive as the elite guys at his size are. I mean, you look at some of those guys, and even if they're late off the ball, you just see a little bit more burst. And when you watch Evans in a chase roll in pursuit, he moves pretty well for his size, but he's not one of those guys that you watch and you go, oh, wow, look at that burst. He's a lot more like a Greg Ellis type, where Ellis was never super bursty, but he won with size and with length and all of that. But I think Ellis was also maybe a little burstier, a little bit more explosive than Evans. And that's something I just don't think physically he's quite as explosive as some of those guys have been. But I think he's still, he's, for his size and all of that, he's plus level in terms of overall, foot quickness and all of the movement skills. He's just not, if you're asking for a guy that has everything, you'd just like to have that 10% more burst, a little bit more explosiveness from him that I just don't think is there. And Pro Day will show this a little bit, but I suspect when Pro Day comes, he's not a guy that has a super high vertical number. I think that vertical number, that broad jump will be, a couple inches lower in the vertical, maybe 6 inches shorter in the broad jump than the guys that are his size and are truly elite.
Guess who I got to talk about next? I got to talk about Elite Johnny T-Shirt. JohnnyT-shirt.com. Sponsors of Inside Carolina. Sponsors, great friends of Inside Carolina and great friends of you at the Inside Carolina Premium Subscriber. You get 10% off. You get all of Jason's scouting reports. You get all of Don's football recruiting, Sherrell's and the Coast crowds recruiting stuff. Then you get 10% off at Johnny T-Shirt, wherever you can get all the swag you want for North Carolina. Also, congruityhr.com/Tar Heels for your small to mid-sized business. Local businesses that have made a name for themselves, Congruity being one. Johnny T-Shirt can dress you. Congruity can get your business up to speed and get you to be the big brand that you want to be. They've done it for themselves. They'll do it for you. Go to congruityhr.com/Tar Heels. Get your small to mid-sized business assessment. Let Darren and Matt help you. Customer service, technology, everything you could possibly want if you're trying to make that leap and that burst into a big-time business. Use Congruity and shop at Johnny T-Shirt. National guys pay the bills. Hey, I'm no Joey Powell doing that stuff, but I thought that was pretty good. The national guys will pay the bills. It's the edges and linebackers with Jason Staples. All right. I thought it was funny. We're back. Jason Staples there. I'm Tommy Ashley. It's InsideCarolina.com. Analysis, podcast, YouTube channel, Beau Atkinson. Beau Atkinson's a guy that when he's out there, he just seems like he's always around the ball. What'd you see on the tape?
You know, Beau is a guy that surprised me last year. And then you go back and you look at the tape and you're like, wow, man, there's something to build on here. He's listed at 6'6", 265. I think from seeing him live, I think that's probably about right. I'm not sure he was fully 265 last year. I think he was probably, 255 or 260 during the year. But he was a guy that found ways to produce disruption repeatedly when he was out there. Now, he played fewer snaps, right? So when you look at Des Evans, for example, Evans played 578 snaps last year. That's a lot of snaps at the edge position. Now, compared to Kaimon Rucker, who played 894 snaps, that's actually not that many. But 578 snaps is a lot. And so Evans, to some extent is playing, it's sort of like playing as a starting pitcher in baseball versus coming in as a middle reliever or a closer. When you're the closer, you come in and you throw your best stuff. And you got a good inning, 2 innings that you're just going to, it's a sprint. You're running 100 meters at full on. If you are playing 578 snaps at edge, you're running 400 meters. You're trying to, make sure that you're running fast enough that when you get to that home stretch, you got a little bit left in the tank so that you can step on the gas. But even then, it's still not going to be as fast as it would be if you were only playing 200. All right? So we have to grade a little bit on a curve there. But here's the thing. It seemed like every time Beau Atkinson came out on the field last year, he made something positive happen. And, you look at the pressure rate, 12.8% pressure rate last year. That's really good. That's a good pressure rate as an edge. Generally, double digits is quality. Above 12 is getting to the very good range, and 15-16% is outstanding for an edge player. So 12.8% pressure rating, finished on 3.5 sacks, found ways to get in the backfield over and over again. Had 2 forced fumbles too. Right? So he just found ways to be disruptive. And were there times last year where he was maybe in the wrong gap? A couple times? Yeah. Were there plays where, he's maybe running around a block that he should have taken on a little bit differently? Yeah. But here's the thing. Generating havoc can atone for a lot of sins. And he was a guy that found ways to do it, and found ways to do it, especially as he got further into the season, within the confines of the defense. He's a long player, 6'6". I think he could carry 275 plus and still move really well. He's actually burstier than Des Evans is. And you look at the quick feet for his size, there are some opportunities he had for little juke moves and things as a pass rusher where he gave a little inside feint and then actually won to the corner against ACC level offensive tackles, which tells you he's got, pretty quick feet and good burst to be able to do that. So I think he showed also that he can be a pretty good edge setter as a big end. There were times where his pad level kind of crept up at a little bit, and he got pushed downfield. And as a run defender, that was where he was weakest at times last year. sort of got moved off his spot too often, got blocked by H-backs sometimes, and you can't let that happen. But, and also I mentioned he ran around some blockers at times instead of taking them on the way that you need to in run context. But to me, he was already a well above replacement level player last year at the Power 4 level, and has upside. And I think actually this year it's going to be interesting to see who gets more snaps between him and Des Evans, because I think you're going to see him cut into the snaps on the edge with a good bit more than he had last year. I mean, you look at 229 snaps versus 578. Evans may end up having 500 plus again this year, but don't be surprised if Atkinson has well over 500 this year as well. I think he's going to be in that rotation as essentially he might be listed right now. I think he's presently listed as third on the depth chart there at end, but I think he's essentially a co-starter in the way that they're going to look at this. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's sort of seen as more of the more reps on passing downs on third down, whereas Evans takes more first and second down in some of those cases, or neutral downs. They'll split that. The other thing is, with the guy that we're covering next, Kaimon Rucker had 894 snaps last year. The best thing that you could see happen is for each player to average, say, 45 snaps per game, rather than Rucker averaging 60 snaps a game, Evans averaging 45 snaps a game, and Atkinson averaging 20, get Atkinson to cut into some of Rucker's snaps so that Rucker can be fresher going into the last part of the year. I think that would be a good thing as well. So, but either way, Atkinson is going to be on the field. I think he's going to probably play 40, in the range of 40 snaps a game this year, regardless of where they come from. And the interesting thing is, with that additional load, the question is going to be how much of that intensity can he continue to maintain, and whether he's able to take a step forward to be a more well-rounded player moving forward. But I think there's a lot to like here, and he's one of the reasons that the edge position at Carolina is one of, in my opinion, the two strongest positions on the defense.
Absolutely. Atkinson plays with a little nastiness, plays with an edge. Let's talk about Kaimon Rucker, though. This is your guy. This is a guy that if Kaimon Rucker needed a cheerleader, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, it is Jason Staples. Rucker has shown it. Rucker had an opportunity to leave this year, decided to come back, switch numbers to number 7 to honor family. He's a leader off the field. He's a leader on the field. He's a standout person. Comes from a good family, great father.
Pretty good singer, too.
Pretty good singer, can sing the national anthem in front of the biggest Final Four crowd in the biggest game. And he's a damn good football player, Jason. What'd you see on
Football player
film?
is what this guy is.
Just straight baller.
He is a football player. That's what he is. And you're right. I've been pounding the drum. I've been pounding the table for this guy for 3 years now. And, production and sort of attention from elsewhere sort of started to catch up last year to what I've been trying to say for 3 years. And that is, this guy is a football player, and he's the kind of guy that you find a place to make sure that he can play. He's not, is he going to fit in every defense? Not necessarily, because he does have some size limitations. He's not the biggest, the fastest, a lot of the physical attributes. There are things where he could probably be, he's not a prototype, but he's one of those guys that you want on your football team, and you make adjustments to make sure that he can be out there and be impactful, because he produces havoc. I mentioned, above 14, 15 pressure rate is excellent. He was at 14.6 last year. That's a 14.6% pressure rate on 894 snaps. That is extremely impressive. That is a very impressive, sustained level of excellence. And there were times where Carolina does not win games. There were probably 2 games last year that Carolina might not win if Rucker just at a certain point in that game doesn't just kind of have it snap inside of him and just go, screw this, I'm just going to beat this guy, and get hold of somebody in the backfield and make a play. One of the reasons they dang near beat Clemson last year is Rucker just obliterated the lead blocker on a counter play, threw the blocker back into the running back, and then was able to make contact in such a way that he was able to dislodge the football all in one play. He took out two blockers, throwing one of them back into the path of the back, who then had to redirect, and then he forced a fumble. It's one of those where it's like, okay, look, I mean, that right there, that's what that guy is. And, I think, so he's played inside, he's played out, played inside at like 255 pounds at one point. He's finally found a home as an edge. He's 6'1.5", maybe 260 pounds. And I think that's probably about right. But, Aaron Donald was not prototypical size on the inside in the NFL either. And he just found ways to beat guys up front. He beat him with quickness. He beat him with craft. He beat him with great hands. That's what Kaimon Rucker is. Kaimon Rucker is a guy that he's country strong. He plays with fantastic leverage, and he bullies guys, and he arrives angry once he gets to the quarterback or to the running back. He's got multiple pass rush moves. He's got a really good rip move, excellent spin move when he does employ it. He can bowl guys. I've seen him win with speed to the edge at times, even though that's not really his game. So, I just think this is a guy that and I've said this for a couple of years now, if I'm an NFL scout looking at the future, and I'm saying, okay, I've got a early third round pick here, and we got maybe one spot that we could have as a sort of defensive line spot, maybe an edge guy, maybe an inside guy. I'm pounding the table for this guy. I'm saying, no, we're taking him. He may not be prototype, but we're going to find ways to get him in our pressure packages. We're going to find ways to move him around, and he's going to be a problem for teams. And, that's what he is. Is he going to win a foot race with, faster quarterbacks or running backs? No. But is he going to be a problem for those guys to get past the line of scrimmage over and over again? Yeah. Is he going to produce pressure? Yeah. Over and over again. This is a really good football player. I just like to see him get a little bit less wear and tear on his body over the course of the year next year. He had 626 snaps in 22, 894 last year. I'd love to see him finish the year with maybe 600, just over 600 snaps next year. And again, have Atkinson take a bunch of those, spread those around. If Cowan can take some of those, that would be helpful. But use him he's got to be on the field when teams get into scoring territory. He's got to be on the field in crunch time in the fourth quarter. But you want to make sure that he's healthy and that he's ready to roll in those cases. But this is a good football player. I think he's one of the best edge players in the ACC and one of the best edge players overall in the country. I think he's an underrated player and should be on NFL draft radars.
Yeah, and he gets beat to death out there, and he had a hand injury in the spring and sat out, got that fixed, full go for the fall. He's a special guy to watch. We talked about some extra contributors on the linebacker side. Jason, any of these edge guys that we haven't mentioned that maybe come along, maybe Malachi Hamrick is out of there. Who else do you see there?
Yeah, Hamrick is one for sure that I would put into the mix. He stood out a few times when we've watched practices. So they've got Hamrick. They've got Jabron Harvey, who actually played at Southern Durham, where I coached for a bit. He's another guy that similar build to Hamrick. I mean, both of those guys, 6'2", 2. They're listed at 240 or whatever. I don't believe either one's 240. They're both on the lighter side. More like what you got from Amari Gaynor last year in terms of that kind of player. And in Jeff Collins' system, there's a place for those guys. There's going to be some NASCAR type rush packages where they go small and they want speed rushers out there and they want to move around because they're going to try to have multiple looks and all that. And, in those kind of NASCAR arrangements, I wouldn't be surprised to see a Hamrick or Harvey. I think Hamrick's a little ahead of Harvey right now, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Hamrick. Yeah, Hamrick's listed at what 215. I think that's more right. But I wouldn't be surprised to see those guys, one of those guys out there at an edge. Maybe you slide Kaimon Rucker inside. Maybe you put a Jacolbe Cowan inside. Different guys like that, and you have a little more speed on the field that you can drop off and rush from elsewhere if you want. There's different things that we'll see, but I think those guys are going to be more situational, and the majority of the snaps are going to come really from Atkinson, Evans, and Rucker, and then Cowan, if he is healthy and takes a step forward, will be the fourth. I think that's going to be the majority of your edge snaps, but ideally you get some from some of those other guys as well, especially in those rush type packages.
Yeah, you got Tyler Thompson too, who's shown some ability. I think he was out there with a club most of the spring out there. So they've got a ton, like you mentioned. They've got the talent, they've got the depth. I think edge. Let's wrap this up now. Let's start backwards, or let's go from. We'll end with linebackers. But overall, in a couple minutes, the edges are probably the first or second most talented group on this team. What do you think?
That's a good question. I'd probably put him second because I think the cornerback group with Huzzy and Allen and the newcomers there who I thought looked really good in the spring, probably number one. But it's 1A and 1B there because Rucker and Huzzy are the two best players on your defense, and so those two can kind of be a wash. Then the question is, okay, is Allen better as your second corner than, say, Des Evans or Beau Atkinson are as your second edge? And I think that's pretty close. I'd probably give the edge to Allen there. And then, I think there's just a little more depth at corner overall than at edge. But I think those are your two best position groups, both in terms of frontline quality and in terms of depth. The real concern is the group that we're going to discuss next video, where I don't think there's as much frontline quality or depth, and that's really where a lot this year is going to be determined, is whether or not that group of defensive tackles takes the step forward that they need to. But that'll be our video next time.
Absolutely, and let's wrap this one real quick. From your observations of Jeff Collins, your following of Jeff Collins, watching him at elsewhere, both as a head coach and defensive coordinator, how will these two specific groups change in what they do for North Carolina, or will they? Linebackers and edges.
I think you'll probably see more. Well, there's no doubt that you will see more blitzing from Collins than you did overall from Chizik. There's going to be also some of that is going to be the kind of five-man pressure where you're going to see a defensive lineman drop. So you'll see an edge drop a little bit more, I think, with Collins than what you did with Chizik. You'll see just different. I think you'll see more variance in terms of fronts. So Collins will run some more hybrid type stuff where there's three-man front with an extra backer there, or a guy that's lined up off the ball, or maybe you move a guy like Kaimon Rucker inside and he's standing up in an A gap. It's sort of like a linebacker. It's that sort of thing. But for the most part, I don't think you're going to see a ton that's going to look different for these two position groups, or look as different as maybe some folks think. Even with the sort of thing where you'd have a stand-up, edge on the inside and all that. I don't think we'll see a ton of that. But that's the sort of thing that Collins has done in the past that, you might expect a little bit of. For the most part, the biggest difference is you're going to see more aggression in terms of guys, bringing blitzers from the secondary, more press coverage from the corners and from the nickel. A little bit more single high type stuff in the secondary as they take a few more chances, and I think that that will allow the edges and the backers to kind of be turned loose to get downhill a little bit more. But it's not like Chizik tried not to let those guys get downhill either. A little bit of, put it this way, 3/4, 80% of coaching defense is not about what scheme you're calling. It's about how much you can get your players to buy into it and play with their hair on fire. And one thing that Jeff Collins has been really, really good at for as long as he's been coaching ball is he connects with young guys and gets them to play really, really hard on defense and gets them to buy into playing physical football and to the mentality of dictating, getting downhill and trying to reset the line of scrimmage and play on the other side of the line of scrimmage and, force the offense to make plays when uncomfortable. It's a mentality shift that he's bringing that I think is the bigger thing than the scheme. There will be some schematic differences for sure, but I think the bigger difference more often than not is that. And, I think that's what you'll probably see a little bit more is, I think you might see a guy like Des Evans buying into looking like he's playing a little bit more with his hair on fire than he has in the past.
Yeah, to wrap that comment up, talking to those guys at spring practice, I think a universal comment from the defensive guys was playing freer and more aggressive and having the freedom and a clear mind of what they're trying to do and to do, like you say, play with their hair on fire. Nothing that you and I have been able to do for years.
Yeah, so here's the thing. And so I just have chosen not to, but for the record. But
I could too, but it would look funny.
Yeah. So but just an interesting thing here. Collins is one of those coaches who, you have different coaches, different mentalities. You got some coaches where it's like, get your assignment right, do your job no matter what. That's the mantra. Collins is one of those coaches where he wants you to do your job. He wants you to understand everything. But there's always this kind of like, look, if you don't know what to do, just find somebody to hit. He's one of those guys. Find somebody to hit. Find a guy, if you're not sure where the ball is, locate the closest guy and decleat that guy. That's kind of his mentality. And he wants that to filter down. And I think that's probably the biggest difference.
It'll be fun to watch, I think, to see guys just find somebody to hit. It's football. Nobody should be standing up after the play's over. That's Jason Staples. I'm Tommy Ashley. It's been Inside Carolina Scouting Overview, UNC position analysis, linebackers, edges, final thoughts, whatever you want to call it. Jason Staples is one of the best at the business of breaking it down and bringing it to you. Sponsors, shout out to them. And fans, shout out to you guys for listening. We will talk defensive line when we come to you next week. Interior guys, it's going to be an interesting discussion. We'll get back together as we collect their thoughts and talk soon. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Tommy.